What's going on, everyone? Mr. Octagonal here. Now, today we are on Madden 19, but Madden 19 is not the focus of today's video. We're actually talking about Madden 20 and teams that I am looking at for my franchise series next year. Obviously, the Dolphins series isn't going anywhere right now, but this is technically the Dolphins replacement. Madden 20, I think, comes out on August 2nd, which is just under 3 months. I hope I can pre-order it and it comes out a few days earlier because I know I'm going away on August 4th. So I'm going to have to grind my butt off for 2 days, but if that's the case, then so be it. So there will be a poll in the description. If you want to go ahead and vote now, that's fine. But if you don't know who to vote for of the 6 teams, then I'll be going in detail of who they have and why they'd be a good franchise team. All 6 teams on the poll are NFC teams because I've done AFC teams 3 years in a row. I've never done an NFC team on YouTube, so I want to do that. And yeah, let's get right into it. First up, we have the Tampa Bay Buccaneers representing the NFC South. The Bucs, they're not good. They are in a clear rebuild. They've been bad for a long time, probably a good 15 years since they were relevant with John Gruden. And they are a perfect franchise team. The only problem is they're going to be very popular, I assume. But other than that, they fit what you look for in a franchise. At quarterback, Jameis Winston, giant question mark. He was the number 1 overall pick a couple of years ago and has so much potential, but has really struggled to live up to it the past few years. And do we stick with Jameis? Do we look elsewhere? I guess that would be one of the main storylines if we did the Bucs. Running back Ronald Jones, second rounder in 2018, didn't really play that well last year, but could look to build around him. Wide receiver Mike Evans on one side, Chris Godwin on the other side. That would be a ton of fun. Evans, the big body, double coverage guy, and then Chris Godwin, deep threat, can stretch the field. I think those two would be a ton of fun to play with. O.J. Howard, really talented young tight end. We could build him into a top 5 tight end in the NFL, I think. The offensive line, they have some talented players, but they also have some big contracts and guys like Ryan Jensen and Donovan Smith who are solid starters, but aren't elite level players, even though they are getting elite O-line money. Onto the defensive line, we can see if we can turn Noah Spence's career around. We can see if we can build up Vita Vea. Gerald McCoy is a giant question mark. He does have some trade rumors around him, and probably would look to deal him within the first year or two, see what we could get for him. At linebacker, they lost Quan Alexander, but replaced him with Devin White, who would be a ton of fun to play with. White is super athletic, good in pass coverage, solid run stopper. We could develop him into a superstar. And then cornerback, they have a bunch of young corners, and I don't know if any of them are super good, or have super good potential, I could say. Maybe we could build a couple of them up. Vernon Hargreaves, first rounder a couple years ago, he's been met. In 2018, they used 2 second rounders, one on MJ Stewart, one on Carlton Davis. And then this year, they used their second rounder on Sean Bunting and their third on Jamel Dean. So they've used pretty much all of their day 2 draft capital the past 2 seasons on cornerbacks. And not to mention they have Vernon Hargreaves. Then at safety, they have Justin Evans at 3 safety, who I really like. Could be a player who we look to build around. And then strong safety, there's no one on the roster who will be the long-term guy. So the secondary has a bunch of question marks. There are 6 players we could build around, but there are also 6 guys who could be band-aids as well, and maybe none of those guys stick around. So the Bucs are a roster of a bunch of question marks, but also a bunch of players who would be super fun to build around. And I think they'd be a really interesting team to use next year. Next up, we have the San Francisco 49ers. They got a ton of votes for Madden 18. Obviously, that ended up being the Chargers, and they are back on the poll this year. The Niners definitely have the best roster of the 6 teams on this poll. They have a really solid squad, but they do need to put a lot of pieces together, and their puzzle is far from complete. At quarterback, Jimmy Garoppolo, talented player, but usually Madden rates him as a below-average starting quarterback. Plus, he's on a gigantic contract and is coming off a knee injury. So, it's not certain that Jimmy Garoppolo is the long-term guy. At running back, they have 3 debatably starting caliber players in Jerick McKinnon, Tevin Coleman, and Matt Breida. Are all 3 of them the future? Are any of them the future? Maybe Matt Breida probably has the best chance. Wide receiver, Marquise Goodwin. Speed kills. Dante Pettis on the other side. Young, fun player to use. Definitely going to be someone who I'd want to keep long-term. And then they used both of their day 2 picks on wide receivers, sort of doing what the Bucs did at corner, adding Deebo Samuel in round 2 and Jalen Hurd in round 3. Didn't really get them doubling down on receivers. I think they have bigger needs. And then they took a punter in the fourth, so they should have addressed their needs better. Tight end George Kittle, I don't think there's a better Madden tight end. Super fun player, very young, one of the best tight ends in the league already. I don't know if you can ask for much more. The O-line, outside of Mike McGlinchey, not really anyone who can be a long-term guy. Defensive line is going to be a ton of fun. You have D Ford on one side, Nick Bosa on the other, and then DeForest Buckner and Solomon Thomas or Eric Armstead inside. That foursome is going to be a ton of fun to play with. At linebacker, Quan Alexander, who is a beast in the Dolphins series. I'd love to play with him again. And then Fred Warner, their third-round pick last year, had a really good rookie year. And then the secondary, they have Richard Sherman at corner. Good Band-Aid for the time being. Very good Band-Aid for the time being, but long-term, probably not the guy. Jason Barrett, same thing. Really good player, but he just can't stay on the field. Safeties, they have what? Jimmy Ward and Adrian Colbert. That's not great. So the secondary has talented players, but are any of them the future? And that's a lot of players on this roster. Guys like Jimmy G, probably all of their running backs, Marquise Goodwin, Solomon Thomas, Eric Armstead, their whole secondary. These are all good players, but are they part of the future? And I guess that's probably the big thing that we would try to determine with this 49er squad. Alright, next up we have the New York Football Giants, who have sort of taken the laughingstock of the NFL title away from the Cleveland Browns, and obviously they'd be a super fun team to do. Daniel Jones at quarterback, is he the guy? Was that the right pick? We'd try to build around him at least. Running back, Saquon Barkley, super fun player. Can't really say much more about that. Wide receiver is a question mark. Obviously, Odell Beckham is gone. All they really have is Sterling Shepard, who is locked up on a pretty big contract. Evan Engram at tight end. He's basically a wide receiver. Also a pretty fun Madden player. And then the O-line, they have a few pieces. Guys like Will Hernandez. But their O-line does need a lot of work. And their offense as a whole, outside of running back, tight end, and maybe quarterback. The D-line is interesting. You have Dexter Lawrence inside, and then Dalvin Tomlinson and B.J. Hill at the end spots. And I think that could be a pretty fun threesome for the defensive line. I think all three of those guys could stick around long term. The linebacking core, we totally have to build up a new core. Their linebackers are horrendous. And then in the secondary, Janoris Jenkins, probably a trade guy early on. And then they have some young players who they've used somewhat high draft picks on, guys like Julian Love, Sam Beal, Corey Ballantyne. So the defense as a whole is a really big question mark outside of the defensive line, I'd say. So the linebackers in the secondary, we'd probably have to get totally new guys at those positions. So the Giants definitely have one of the worst rosters in the NFL, but they'd be a really fun team to build back to relevance. Next up, we have the Washington Redskins, who also just drafted their potential franchise quarterback in Dwayne Haskins. I love rolling out with my quarterbacks. Haskins is not mobile, so it would give me a new challenge. And Haskins isn't going to be as overpowered as Kyler Murray. However, I think he'll be good enough to be really good, and I think he'd be a really fun guy to build around. Running back Darius Geis, not talked about as one of the better young running backs in the NFL since he didn't play last year, but he's someone who has a chance to be really good. Wide receiver Paul Richardson, Josh Doxson, meh. But they did just draft Terry McLaurin in the third round, who I really like. Somewhat big, really fast, really fun player. Tight end Jordan Reed, super talented if he can stay on the field. O-line, same thing. They have guys like Brandon Scherf, Trent Williams, who we could look to build around if they can stay on the field. And this whole Redskins team was getting injured last year. They probably would have made the playoffs had it not been for all those injuries. Defensive line, ton of fun, I think. Matt Ioannidis and Deron Payne inside. And then Jonathan Allen and Montez Sweat as ends, or maybe go 3-4, move Ioannidis to end, Sweat to outside linebacker. I don't know, but all four of those guys would be a ton of fun to play with. Linebacker, Ryan Kerrigan isn't getting any younger. Probably not someone who we keep long-term. They let Zach Brown go. So other than Montez Sweat, if you classify him as a linebacker, their linebacking core does need improvement. Secondary, same thing. Not many household names. Josh Norman, meh. Monte Nicholson, meh. They cut DJ Swearinger for whatever reason. So outside of their defensive line, sort of like the Giants, their linebacking core and secondary really is not good, and they would be a ton of fun to build around, as the linebacking core and secondary are two of the biggest parts in the Dolphins series. Guys like Raekwon McMillan, who's been incredible this year at linebacker through 3 weeks. And then the secondary, we've seen guys like Jabril Peppers, Marlon Humphrey, Minkah Fitzpatrick turn into really good players. And I think the Redskins would be an extremely fun team to do. Next up, we have the Arizona Cardinals, who were the worst team in the NFL last year, so they obviously do have plenty of work to be done on their roster. Quarterback, Kyler Murray is going to be so much fun to play with if we do go with the Cardinals. I mean, I don't really need to go into detail how cheesy he's going to be. Running back David Johnson, he's not a young pup anymore. Really good in the Brown series back in Madden 17, but he's entering his 5th year, hasn't been the same player since his sophomore campaign. We can see if we can build him up. Wide receiver, Larry Fitzgerald, we got him for 1 more year. Christian Kirk, fun player. Andy Isabella, who they basically traded Josh Rosen for. Super fast, 4.31 speed. And then Hakeem Butler, their 4th round pick, who I really like. I graded him as a late 1st round prospect. Sort of a poor man's DK Metcalf, big body, really fast, really fun for Madden. Tight end and offensive line do need plenty of work, so we will look to build around those spots. Defensive line as well, really outside of Chandler Jones, they don't have much. Linebacking core, Jordan Hicks was signed to a big contract. Hassan Reddick, I think, would be a pretty fun player to use as like a hybrid guy. And then the secondary, more question marks. You have Patrick Peterson, who's a great cornerback, but there have been trade rumors with him the past couple years, and he's nearing 30. And then Budda Baker, another fun hybrid player, so really there aren't many players who would be safe on this team outside of probably Kyler Murray, and I think we could really change this roster and try to get back to the success that this team had for a few years when Carson Palmer was really good. And last, but certainly not least, we have my favorite team, the Detroit Lions. I really did not know if I wanted to put my Lions on the poll, because they are my favorite team, and maybe it would be a little bit biased of a series, but after really thinking about it, the Lions need my help, and they're not a great roster. They've been mediocre for the past 60 years, and they're not really headed in a good direction, so I don't have to choose a franchise team that's super bad. Rather, I could always choose a team that's not great and not really headed in any direction as well, and that's basically the same thing as we would have to build up this roster. Quarterback Matthew Stafford, he's an average starting quarterback, I'd say. He'd be a fine guy for the first few years, but is he really going to win this team a Super Bowl? Probably not, and we could look elsewhere in the future. Running back, you guys know I love Kerryon. We would definitely look to build around him. Wide receiver, I think there's only one real building block, and that's Kenny Golladay, entering his 3rd year. Big-bodied, red zone guy. Outside of that, there's not much. Danny Amendola is a 1-year rental. Marvin Jones is a good player, but he's probably more of a Band-Aid. Tight end, TJ Hawkinson, the rookie. I think he'd have a Mike Gesicki-like role. Basically how Gesicki's being used in the Dolphins series, and if that's the case, then TJ Hawkinson's going to be really good. O-line, there's a few young pieces, Frank Ragnow, Taylor Decker, but the O-line does need some work. Defensive line's going to be a ton of fun. Trey Flowers at the defensive end spot. Inside, we got Snacks Harrison and Deshaun Hand. So I think those 3 would be really fun to build around. Snacks is probably like 30, 31 years old by now, so he'd mainly be a guy for the first 2 years, I'd say. And then I think his contract is up. Linebacker, Jared Davis, try to build around him. Jelani Tavai, I'm still not over that pick, how terrible it was, but hopefully Tavai can prove me wrong, and maybe we can make him good in this series. Secondary, Darius Slay, great corner, but he's not getting any younger. And then we definitely made a lot of moves at corner in the offseason. Justin Coleman to a 4-year contract. Rashawn Melvin's a decent player. Amani Oruwariye in the 5th round, which was a total steal. And then safety, deep safety group, Quandre Diggs and Tavon Wilson, along with Youngins in, Tracy Walker and Will Harris. So the defense as a whole has plenty of pieces, but no real superstars outside of maybe Flowers, Snacks, and Slay, if you consider any of them superstars. And then the offense, same thing. Have some young pieces like Kerryon Johnson, Kenny Golladay, TJ Hawkinson, but the team as a whole needs work, and we're not really going in a specific direction, which is not a good thing. So I think all 6 of these teams will be a very fun choice for my Madden 19 for my Madden 20 franchise. Make sure to vote in the link in the description if you've not already, and have a great day.